And with this, we begin talking about the rhetorical modes of writing, of discourse in greater detail. In module 2, we were concerned with the many things that writing can do for an architect or an urban planner or an engineer or an urban designer, or all the many things, many hats that all of us wear, for all of us, basically. And we have realized that we can look at writing as a way of learning, as a way of communicating, as a way of articulating thoughts to ourselves. Now, starting from this idea, we realize that we can use writing or we can use words in various forms in order to do things like persuade our clients, articulate alternatives that we want someone to look at. We can use writing to help us understand X, whatever X might be. Could be a process, could be a way of constructing something, could be a way of dismantling something, could be a way for one of our clients to engage with one of our products. We can use writing also to explain a phenomenon that we have studied and we are aware of, and our readers may not be aware of it. Similarly, we can use it to propose an explanation for a phenomenon, not just to understand it, but also to be able to take it from this phenomenon and replicate it in other similar situations. But we can also use writing for fun things like to tell a story of how something came to be or a story of something that we have done. When we look at all of these many uses that writing may have, and obviously this doesn't even cover the half of it, what we're talking about, in fact, are the various functions, fundamentally the various jobs that writing can do. We're talking about tasks like the argumentative function of writing, the one that is meant to convince people of an idea that we have. We're talking about the analytical function of writing, which is where we're using writing in order to derive meaning out of observations that we have made. We're talking about the expository or the narrative function of writing. We're talking about the descriptive. And these are the aspects that we will be concerned with and that we want to understand in detail. Now, when we think of these as teachers, what we usually think of is a sort of division in which the argumentative, the analytical, the descriptive, and the expository seem much more instinctively connected to our domains. They're part of what makes our thesis, they're part of what makes our academic writing, they're part of what we are asked to do in the studio whenever we're talking about a project. Narratives, well, narratives are complicated because narrative is a word we use to refer to everything, but everything is not, in fact, narrative, and that's an important distinction that we will have to make. But narratives as such, narratives as a form of storytelling, is something that we don't often associate with our domains, with our disciplines, and we'll see whether that is the case or not. And poetry, or the poetic function of writing, is something that is very often left outside of our domain, outside of our expertise. So we see these three broad categories: the one that pertains, that leads up to the argumentative, from descriptive in a range through the analytical to the argumentative, as one cluster, the narrative as another, and the poetic as the final cluster that we have in mind. Now, with these also comes this understanding that when we're talking about levels of difficulty, when we're talking about levels of complexity, the same kind of pyramid that we were talking about earlier on, when we looked at cognitive ways of learning, the same kind of pyramid applies to writing as well. So, what you will often hear said is that students in the beginning of their journeys in our institutions are more equipped to engage with descriptive or expository kinds of writing, that as they develop domain expertise and knowledge, they are able to start working on analytical modes of writing, and then eventually, towards the end of their trajectory in an institution, they can engage more and more with the argumentative mode of writing, which is where they put forward their own ideas and they're trying to persuade us, to convince us of them. Whether this system of understanding writing is something that you subscribe to or not, we will come back to later on. But for now, the point is that we need to understand what our expectations are, and we need to understand what each one of these entails in order to be able to use it with our students. So we start with the first one, which is the descriptive mode of writing. If we are to take a definitional understanding of it, the job of the descriptive mode of writing is to capture observed details. It is to look at factual aspects which do not require additional interpretation. We state what is there in front of us. We state what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we experience through our senses without an additional level of identifying what meaning we make of these things. Um, we can do this with objects. We can do this with something like a piece of furniture. We can do this with a building. But we can also do this with phenomena, with things that we see happening around us. We can do this with neighborhoods and with cities if we are urban planners or designers. We can do this with typography if we are talking about our students who are looking at communication design. The task that the descriptive mode of writing performs is a representational one. It is a capturing of what is present in front of us, just like a photograph, but in words. What is often said is that this representational, descriptive mode of writing is devoid of value judgment, is devoid of additional investment, subjective perception. This, of course, is open to debate. So you could think for one of Terry Eagleton's understanding of how value judgment colors everything we notice and therefore everything we decide to capture. However, we can start by taking this working definition and looking at a text such as this that tells us the layout of this building is itself transparent. The tall, narrow, oblong slab, which houses the firm's offices, is set off center on a roughly square pedestal, only 2 stories high, that covers the whole plot, the western block front along Park Avenue between 53rd and 54th. This irregularly shaped site runs 150 feet west on 53rd and 190 feet west on the 54th. The pedestal is a hollow one, for there is a court open to the sky in the middle of it, just to the south of the slab. To the north of the court, on the ground floor, is the glass walled main lobby, and to the west of the court are an auditorium and a kitchen laboratory. The court and the lobby can be reached from almost any direction, for the ground floor is completely open to 3 sides, north, south, and east, to the streets. There is no vestige of wall or even of shop front window to shut out the passerby. We look at this text because it is one of those texts which are considered iconic and which are often used across writing programs, especially when we're talking to budding architectural critics, people who want to engage with words in domains like our own. We look at this text and we ask, what function does it perform? What is its job? And the obvious thing right in front of us is it's trying to capture all the important details. It's talking about the layout in general. It is talking about where this particular part of the building is located. It's talking about how it is connected to everything around it. It's looking at it in a sequence which enables the reader to visualize it. So it's not throwing at us detail after detail, but it is making a choice in the way in which the description is given to us so that we're able to move through the space inside our heads and see what the writer is talking about, even when we do not have an image in front. What it does also is to build on knowledge that already exists, knowledge that the writer can take for granted in the reader. It makes reference to Building elements, it makes reference to locations, which it assumes that we either know or we're able to maybe Google them if we're not aware of them. It uses words, it uses terminology which is specific to the discipline. It talks about things like a pedestal, for instance, but terms which are not jargon, which are not so specific that the lay reader will not be able to understand them. And wherever needed, it adds explanations, it adds additional details to support us in our meaning making exercise. What the descriptive mode does is to engage with physical aspects, aspects related to use, and it draws connections between these. It tells us, for instance, the fact that the space can be accessed from multiple directions, and then it adds to that to tell us why. What is it about the layout that makes it possible to do so? We're interested in the descriptive mode because this comes in handy in class. Where do we use it? And this is not an exhaustive list by any means. We use it very often with starting level students because the descriptive mode of writing is an excellent opportunity to ask our students to observe something closely. Go look at it, we tell them. Go look at the space and tell me everything about it. It is an opportunity also to engage with the vocabulary of the discipline. I'm looking at this room, but do I have the words to say what I want to say about it? And if I don't have the words, the descriptive mode of writing gives me a chance to pause, to ask around, to read a book, to check it out online, and to figure out what are the correct words to use for this particular engagement, for this description. But we don't use the descriptive mode only in the first year or with starting point students. We use it with all students in the beginning of processes of engaging with sites, with research, with contexts. We're asking them to tell us what they see before we ask them to tell us how they interpret what they see. This is an additional step that gives us a bit of control as tutors over the process of meaning making to make sure that everything is covered. With all writers, it's not just part of the beginning of their own process, but it is also part of the beginning of the process of sharing with the reader. We have had a chance to see the space, the object, the environment, the background. We need our reader to be able to see the same things. So before we jump into meaning making and interpretation, we need to often show our readers what the phenomenon looks like. We need to describe it. We need to show them what the building looks like, or the corner of the building, or the product, or the object, or whatever it is. So the descriptive mode of writing appears not only as a standalone thing, but also as part of other modes of writing, especially the analytical, especially the argumentative. All writers also bring it into narrative or poetic texts because we want our readers to have a sense of the setting, we want our readers to have a sense of where we are located. Similar to this descriptive mode of writing is the expository mode. It is different in that it may not relate to something that is physically present in front of us. It performs, however, a very similar function. So let us look at a similar sample text. This one which says squat, that is its subtitle, and it tells us it is now well established that squatting, the process of occupying and incrementally building urban habitation on land or in structures to which residents do not hold legal title, is the mainstay of how auto constructed cities are inhabited. The literature speaks of squatting mostly as, in Alexander Vasudevan's words, a quote unquote response to and an expression of housing precarity, end quote. The housing that results from squatting, often mistakenly reduced to a catch all category of slum, is perhaps the single most recognizable marker of the landscape of southern cities and of writing on them. This remains empirically true of all contemporary Indian cities. And indeed, for many of these cities, Simon and Peters' description of the vulnerable urban majority is both apt and accurate. Now, this fragment of a text is not describing to us a physical situation, it is not describing to us an object, and yet it is descriptive of what? Of informational, of data content. The job of the expository mode of writing is to capture all the important details of a phenomenon, of a situation. The situation might even be the situation of the literature, the status of the literature on a particular topic. It does so just like a descriptive text in a sequence which enables the reader to comprehend it. We don't jump straight to what Vasudevan had to say, but we provide a context for it. It does so by building on the already existing knowledge of the reader, and similarly, it invites the reader, if it doesn't know, to go and find out. And it does so in words and in terminology which is deliberate, which is specific to the discipline, and yet it is not obfuscating, it is not full of jargon to a point where we're not able to understand. In this case, the expository mode of writing is something that we will meet very often in argumentative text, in analytical text, because all of these types of text are meant to build on already existing phenomena, things that we see in the real world, or on texts which were presented, created by other people. Similar to the expository mode of writing, and the last one that we will look at right now is what we call the summary function. It's something that we often ask our students to do, but it's also something that we're often wary of. When we tell our students, don't summarize this text for me, I've already read it. Analyze it, don't summarize it. And yet, we need to understand that the summary function is at the same time important and difficult. Like the expository mode, the summary function requires a neutral presentation of what is there in front of us, and that is not an easy thing to do. It requires an accurate, a correct presentation of the text that we have engaged with or the lecture that we have engaged with without our own opinions, without our own biases coming in between. It requires us to be brief in capturing what the writer or the speaker claimed. So, very often, the summary function, just like the descriptive function, just like the expository function, is an absolutely necessary step. A step that allows the writer to engage with the content that they are planning to build on before they move into their own analysis, before they move into trying to persuade us of what their beliefs are. A final distinction for us to keep in mind: the summary function is different from the paraphrase function. While the summary requires us to capture something in brief, to extract the most important aspects of it, the paraphrase function entails a more detailed capturing of the text. However, a detailed capturing which is in our own words, in our own reproduction of the text that we engaged with. It is discussion, it is not opinion, however. So with this, we come to the end of our first set of functions. Remember, we have not even engaged with the more complex ones like the analytical and the argumentative functions, and we have definitely not looked at the others of this set, the narrative and the poetic. But let's try to work with these for a bit to make sure that we understand them well.